You've seen it in certain people. Maybe you can't put words to it yet, but you've noticed. There are people in their 70s who walk into a room and bring something alive with them. Something electric, curious, almost childlike in the best possible way. And then there are people in their mid-30s who already look like they've settled into a permanent gray. Same routines, same complaints, same slow leak of whatever made them interesting 10 years ago. The difference between those two kinds of people has almost nothing to do with genetics, diet, or how many supplements they take in the morning. It has everything to do with how they move through an ordinary day. Carl Jung became obsessed with this difference. He watched patients age decades in a single year of psychic stagnation, and he watched others, people who should have been ground down by life, maintain a vitality that defied every external circumstance working against them. What fascinated him was that the vital ones weren't doing anything extraordinary. They weren't meditating on mountaintops. They weren't following some elaborate self-care routine. They'd simply built small, almost invisible habits into the fabric of their daily lives. Habits that kept the channels between their conscious and unconscious minds open, that prevented the kind of psychic calcification Jung believed was the real source of aging. Because here's something Jung understood that most people miss entirely. You don't age the way you think you do. Yes, your body follows a biological clock. But the thing that makes you feel old, the heaviness, the cynicism, the creeping sense that your best years already happened, that's psychological. It's what happens when the psyche becomes rigid. When you stop growing, stop being surprised by yourself, stop encountering anything genuinely new in the landscape of your own mind. Jung watched people die internally decades before their bodies followed, and he traced it back to the same handful of patterns every single time. Today I'm going to walk you through the 5 daily habits Jung identified, through his own practice and through decades of watching patients, that keep a person psychologically alive, genuinely happy, and young in the only way that actually matters. These aren't productivity hacks. They aren't wellness trends repackaged in Jungian language. They're practices rooted in how the human psyche actually works. And most of them will surprise you because they look nothing like what modern self-help tells you to do. Let's start with the one that changed everything for Jung personally. The first habit is giving yourself a stretch of genuine solitude every single day. And I mean genuine, which is something almost nobody experiences anymore. Jung drew a hard line between being alone and being in solitude. Being alone with your phone, your podcast, your mental to-do list running on a loop, that's just isolation with entertainment. Solitude, the kind Jung practiced, means sitting with yourself with nothing between you and your own inner world. No input, no distraction, just you and whatever rises to the surface when you stop drowning it out. Jung built an entire tower at Bollingen for this purpose. He'd retreat there regularly, sometimes for weeks, and spend hours in a state of deliberate inner quiet. He chopped wood, he cooked simple meals, he sat by the lake. And in those stretches of undistracted aloneness, things came to him. Images, feelings, realizations that never would have surfaced in the noise of his regular life in Zurich. He wrote that some of his most important insights arrived during these periods, uninvited, as if the unconscious had been trying to get his attention for months and finally found the silence it needed to speak. What he discovered was that solitude functions like a pressure valve for the psyche. Every day you accumulate psychological material, impressions, emotions, reactions, fragments of experience that don't get processed because you're too busy experiencing the next thing. Without regular periods of genuine quiet, all that material gets compressed into the unconscious, where it builds pressure. Over months and years, that pressure manifests as irritability, anxiety, a vague sense of being disconnected from your own life. You feel old because you've lost access to the deeper currents of your own psychology. Everything happening inside you is buried under the noise. Jung recommended that every person, regardless of temperament, regardless of whether they considered themselves introverted or extroverted, build at least 20 to 30 minutes of real solitude into their day. Morning was his preference because the transition from sleep to waking is when the unconscious is closest to the surface. Those first quiet minutes, before you check your messages, before you start performing for the world, are when the psyche is most willing to show you what it's working on. And the people who did this, Jung's patients who actually committed to daily solitude, reported something he found consistently remarkable. They described feeling younger, more pliable, more curious, as if something that had been going stiff inside them was slowly loosening again. Jung understood why. The psyche stays young through movement, through flow between conscious and unconscious. Block that flow with constant noise and distraction, and the psyche hardens like a joint that hasn't been stretched in years. Daily solitude is the stretch. The second habit runs against everything modern culture tells you about how to spend your time. Work with your hands every day on something that has no practical purpose. Jung carved stone. He built sections of his Bollingen Tower with his own hands. He painted, he sculpted, he made elaborate illustrations in what became the Red Book, images so strange and vivid that they look like they came from someone channeling another century entirely. And he didn't do any of this because he wanted to become an artist. He did it because he discovered that working with the hands activates a part of the psyche that thinking alone can never reach. Here's what he observed. When you work with your hands, shaping clay, drawing, cooking something from scratch, building, gardening, carving, even just arranging stones, you enter a state where the ego loosens its grip without you having to force it. The rational mind, which spends all day categorizing and controlling, steps back slightly because it doesn't know what to do with purposeless physical creation. And in that gap, the unconscious starts to express itself through the work. You make choices you can't explain. You're drawn to shapes, colors, arrangements that carry meaning you won't understand until later, if you understand them at all. Jung believed this was one of the primary ways people in ancient cultures stayed psychologically healthy. They made things. They wove, they carved, they shaped their environments with their own bodies. And through that making, they stayed in conversation with parts of themselves that modern people have almost entirely abandoned. We type, we swipe, we click, we consume content created by others. But we rarely make anything with our own hands, and Jung would have said this is one of the great psychic catastrophes of modern life. The reason this keeps you young is that purposeless creation is essentially play. And play, in Jung's framework, is the language of the child archetype, the part of you that remains endlessly curious, endlessly generative, endlessly willing to experiment without knowing the outcome. When you stop playing, that archetype goes dormant. And when the child archetype goes dormant, something essential drains out of your personality. You become efficient, but empty, productive, but lifeless. You know how to function, but you've forgotten how to be genuinely interested in anything, including yourself. Jung was in his 70s when he was still carving inscriptions into stone at Bollingen. People who visited him during that period described a man who seemed inexplicably vital, sharp, engaged, full of humor and mischief. His hands were rough from the work. His mind was alive because of it. The connection between those two things wasn't accidental. You don't need a stone tower. You don't even need artistic talent. What you need is 15 minutes a day of making something with your hands where the outcome doesn't matter. Sketch something terrible. Shape a piece of clay into something unrecognizable. Arrange flowers in a way that only makes sense to you. Cook without a recipe. The point isn't the product. The point is the state the process puts you in. That liminal space where the ego relaxes and the deeper self gets to breathe. The third habit is one Jung practiced religiously for most of his adult life, and it's one that almost everyone in the modern world has completely abandoned. Pay attention to your dreams. Jung kept a dream journal for decades. Every morning, before anything else, he'd write down what he'd dreamed. He didn't analyze them immediately. He just recorded them. He treated his dreams the way a naturalist treats field observations, with respect, with attention, without rushing to interpretation. Over time, patterns emerged, themes repeated, characters appeared and reappeared. His dream life became a parallel narrative running alongside his waking life, offering commentary, warning, insight, and sometimes a kind of dark humor that he found both unsettling and deeply valuable. He came to believe that dreams are the primary language through which the unconscious communicates with consciousness. Every night, your psyche is producing these elaborate, bizarre, emotionally charged experiences, and most people wake up, shake them off, and immediately start scrolling through notifications. Jung found this staggering. It's like receiving a letter every single day from the deepest, wisest part of yourself and throwing it away without opening it. What makes dream attention a habit that keeps you young is this. Dreams keep you in relationship with parts of yourself that waking life neglects. Your waking ego has a very specific, very narrow agenda. Get through the day, manage impressions, pursue goals, avoid threats. Your dream life operates on a completely different agenda. It's concerned with your wholeness. It brings up material you've been avoiding. It rehearses scenarios your conscious mind refuses to consider. It introduces you to aspects of yourself, what Jung would call shadow figures, anima or animus figures, the self, that you'd never encounter if you stayed locked in the ego's daytime routine. People who pay regular attention to their dreams report something Jung noticed consistently, a feeling of being more dimensionally alive. Like their experience of being human has texture and depth, rather than the flat, two-dimensional quality that comes from living only on the surface of consciousness. Dreams give you access to the underground river of your own psyche, and that river carries vitality. Block access to it, and you dry out. Keep the channel open, and something in you stays green. The practice itself is simple. Keep a notebook by your bed. When you wake up, before you move, before you reach for anything, write down whatever you remember. Fragments are fine. Single images are fine. Even just the emotional residue of a dream you can't quite recall is worth noting. Over weeks and months, you'll start noticing patterns, recurring symbols, emotional themes, messages that become clearer the more you pay attention. Jung described this as building a relationship with the unconscious, and like any relationship, it deepens with consistent attention and withers with neglect. If any of this is landing for you, if you're recognizing something in these habits that feels like it's been missing from how you move through your days, you might find real value in sitting with some of these ideas more deliberately. We put together a guide called True Self-Discovery, built around 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's approach to inner work. It's designed for exactly this kind of turning point, when you sense there's a richer way to live, but you're not sure how to get there from where you are. The link is right below this video. The fourth habit is one that sounds deceptively simple until you actually try to do it consistently. Spend time in the natural world every day and do it with your full attention. Jung didn't just enjoy nature. He considered contact with the natural world essential for psychological health, as necessary as food or sleep. At Bollingen, he lived without electricity for long stretches. He woke with the light. He watched storms cross the lake. He observed how the seasons changed the landscape around his tower, and he let those changes affect him, let them move through his psychology the way they moved through the physical world. He wrote about how modern humans had severed themselves from the rhythms they evolved within. We live in temperature-controlled environments. We eat the same foods year-round. We experience the same artificial light from morning to night. And this severance, Jung argued, does something subtle but devastating to the psyche. It creates a kind of rootlessness, the feeling of floating in a world of your own construction, disconnected from the larger living systems you're actually part of. When you step into a forest, sit beside moving water, watch clouds shift overhead, or just feel wind against your skin with genuine presence, something in the nervous system recalibrates. The ego, which spends all day inflated with its own importance, gets quietly dwarfed by the scale of what it's perceiving. Trees that have been growing for 100 years, water that's been following the same path for millennia, the indifference of weather to your deadlines and anxieties. This perspective adjustment is profoundly healthy, and Jung believed it functioned as a daily corrective to the ego inflation that modern life constantly encourages. There's something else happening during genuine contact with nature that Jung understood intuitively and that neuroscience has since confirmed. The natural world engages the senses in ways that artificial environments can't replicate. The patterns in bark, the movement of leaves, the sound of birdsong. These are complex enough to hold attention, but irregular enough to prevent the kind of hypnotic fixation that screens produce. Your mind enters a state of what researchers now call soft fascination, alert but relaxed, engaged but not controlled. It's remarkably close to the state Jung described when he talked about active imagination, the technique he developed for dialoguing with the unconscious. Jung noticed that his patients who maintained regular, attentive contact with natural settings had a quality he could only describe as freshness. They seemed less burdened, more responsive to what was actually in front of them rather than trapped in rehearsed reactions. They laughed more easily. They surprised themselves more often. They retained the capacity for wonder, which Jung considered one of the hallmarks of a psyche that hasn't calcified. The habit doesn't require wilderness. It doesn't even require a full hour. What it requires is presence. 10 minutes sitting under a tree where you're actually watching the light filter through the leaves, actually feeling the air, actually hearing what's around you rather than disappearing into your thoughts, does more for the psyche than a full day spent outdoors while mentally somewhere else entirely. Jung would have said the healing isn't in nature itself. It's in the quality of attention you bring to it. The fifth habit is the one Jung considered most important and most difficult, and it's the one that ties all the others together. Practice radical honesty with yourself at the end of every day. Jung had a version of this he performed nightly, though he never formalized it into a technique for others. He would sit with his day, not reviewing his accomplishments, not planning tomorrow, but honestly examining the moments where he'd been unconscious, the moments he'd reacted instead of responded, the flashes of irritation he'd suppressed rather than understood, the small dishonesties, the performances, the places where he'd chosen comfort over truth. He didn't do this to punish himself. He did it because he believed that psychological honesty was the single most powerful force available to a human being, and that most people avoided it their entire lives. What he found was that the daily practice of facing yourself, really facing yourself, without the buffer of excuses or the comfort of self-righteousness, prevents the accumulation of psychological debt that ages people faster than anything else. Every time you avoid acknowledging something about yourself, it doesn't disappear. It gets pushed into the shadow, where it takes up psychic space and energy. Over years, the shadow grows heavy with all the things you refuse to look at. And that heaviness is what people feel as aging. The tiredness that doesn't respond to sleep. The cynicism that used to be openness. The sense that life is happening to you rather than through you. Jung's daily self-examination was a way of keeping the shadow current. Instead of letting rejected material accumulate for decades until it erupted in a midlife crisis or a complete breakdown, he processed it in small, manageable doses every evening. He'd ask himself, where did I act out of fear today? Where was I dishonest? What emotion did I suppress, and why? What did I project onto someone else that actually belongs to me? These questions aren't comfortable. That's the point. The comfort of self-deception is exactly what makes people old before their time. They build layer after layer of protective narrative around who they think they are, and each layer takes them further from who they actually are. And the distance between those two selves is felt in the body as weight, as exhaustion, as the slow drain of vitality that no amount of exercise or supplements can reverse. The people who maintain this practice, even 5 or 10 minutes of honest self-reflection before sleep, report something that sounds almost paradoxical. They feel lighter, more flexible, more able to respond to life with genuine spontaneity rather than rehearsed patterns. Because when you're not carrying yesterday's unexamined baggage, you actually get to show up fresh today. The morning feels like a real beginning instead of a continuation of the same unprocessed loop. Jung connected this directly to psychological youth. Children are honest with themselves in ways that adults have forgotten how to be. A child feels anger and expresses it, feels sadness and cries, feels joy and laughs without checking whether laughter is appropriate. Adults learn to suppress, perform, and curate, and every layer of that curation buries the spontaneous, vital self a little deeper. Daily honesty is how you dig it back out. One small truth at a time. One acknowledged fear, one admitted pettiness, one recognized projection. These tiny acts of self-honesty function like psychological maintenance, keeping the machinery of the self clean and moving. Now here's something important about these 5 habits taken together, because they're more connected than they might seem on the surface. Solitude creates the space for the unconscious to surface. Working with your hands gives the unconscious a medium to express itself through. Dream attention lets you hear what the unconscious is trying to tell you during the night. Nature contact resets the ego's inflation and reconnects you to something larger than your personal story. And daily self-honesty clears the debris that would otherwise clog the channels between all these practices. They form a kind of loop. Each one feeds the others. Solitude makes your dreams more vivid. Dream attention makes your self-honesty more precise. Working with your hands makes your solitude more productive. Nature contact makes your creative play more grounded. Together, they create what Jung would have recognized as a living relationship between the conscious and unconscious minds, the relationship he considered essential for genuine psychological health. And the word he kept returning to when he described people who maintained this relationship was alive. They were alive in a way that transcended age, circumstance, even suffering. He watched patients in their 80s who practiced some version of these habits walk into his office with the same spark he saw in healthy children. That quality of being genuinely present, genuinely responsive, genuinely interested in what the next moment might bring. And he watched people in their 40s who'd abandoned all inner life shuffle through their days like sleepwalkers, performing routines that had lost all meaning, aging from the inside out while their bodies were still technically young. The difference was never mysterious to Jung. It was mechanical. The psyche, like the body, needs daily maintenance. It needs movement, the movement of energy between consciousness and the unconscious, between the ego and the deeper self, between the known parts of you and the vast unknown regions that most people pretend don't exist. Stop that movement, and things get stiff. Keep it going, and something in you stays supple, curious, capable of genuine surprise. What strikes me about these 5 practices is how humble they are. There's nothing glamorous about sitting quietly for 20 minutes. There's nothing Instagram-worthy about scribbling down dream fragments in a half-asleep haze. Working with clay or gardening or sketching doesn't generate the kind of visible results that modern productivity culture rewards. Walking through a park with genuine attention looks exactly like walking through a park without it. You can't photograph the difference. And honest self-reflection before bed produces no external evidence at all. But Jung spent 60 years of his professional life watching what happened to people who did these things versus people who didn't. And the evidence, accumulated across thousands of patients and decades of observation, pointed relentlessly in the same direction. The people who maintained a daily practice of inner attention stayed vital, flexible, and engaged with life in ways that defied every expectation. And the people who abandoned inner life for external achievement, no matter how successful they became, aged internally at a rate that stunned even Jung. He was blunt about this in his later writings. He said that people in the second half of life who had no relationship with their unconscious were essentially living as psychological corpses, going through motions that had lost all depth, repeating patterns that no longer served any purpose, unable to access the creative, regenerative energies that the unconscious makes available to anyone willing to pay attention. That sounds harsh, and Jung meant it to sound harsh. He'd spent too many years watching people sleepwalk through lives that could have been extraordinary if they'd just bothered to look inward for 20 minutes a day. The waste of it frustrated him. Because the psyche wants to keep you young. The unconscious is constantly generating new material, new images, new possibilities, new energy. It's doing this right now, inside you, as you listen to this. The question is whether you're going to keep ignoring it or finally open the door. These habits are that door. 5 simple daily practices that create the conditions for the psyche to do what it's been trying to do all along. Keep you in relationship with the fullness of who you are. Keep the channels open. Keep the energy moving. Keep you young in the only way that counts, from the inside out. Jung was in his 80s when he gave his last major interviews. People who met him during those years consistently remarked on the same thing: his eyes. They were alert, playful, interested. He'd laugh at his own contradictions. He'd ask questions with genuine curiosity. He'd sit in long silences without any apparent discomfort. He was, by every account, more alive at 80 than most people managed to be at 30. He'd spent his life practicing what he preached. The solitude at Bollingen, the stone carving, the dream journals that filled volume after volume, the walks along the lake, the unflinching nightly reckoning with his own shadow. These habits were the architecture of his inner life, and that inner life sustained him long after it should have, by any ordinary measure, started winding down. You might be sitting with all of this and feeling something stir, maybe recognition, maybe resistance, maybe a mix of both. If part of you is already thinking about how you'd build even one of these practices into your actual day-to-day life, you might want to look at our guide, True Self-Discovery. It's 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's teachings, designed for people who sense there's more to their inner world than they've been paying attention to. The kind of thing that gives you a concrete starting place when the ideas feel right, but the practice feels uncertain. You'll find the link right below.